Thank you very much. Okay, that's great. I'm never quite sure how much we benefit from the improvements in technology, but now I have to wear a very heavy badge that I have to carry around with me that apparently does something wonderful. Whereas before it always used to work with a piece of paper that was sort of kind of stuck to my shirt. And I don't know quite what the benefit is in doing that, but there we go. And this is one of the, I think, challenges of technology overall. And this spring on here is also a slightly challenging piece of technology. I'll stick it in my pocket. There we go. So I'm going to be talking about, are we ready to go? Can we work out a combination of buttons that works? There we go. Right. Fantastic. Okay. I'm from a company called Arkessa, and I'm one of the special interest group champions for a group called Connected Devices. And this is within Cambridge Wireless. And what's happening now? Okay, we're back off to something else. Anyway, I'll see if I can get this back on track. The Connected Devices Group, we look at connecting stuff. And we've been looking at connecting stuff for quite some considerable time now, actually. And one of those areas is to do with what we generally called machine-to-machine communications, which is joining one thing up to another. And actually, Simon in his introduction talked about kind of known technology a little bit, about as though we kind of know how to do the Internet of Things. My argument is that we don't have a clue about how to do the Internet of Things, that we haven't got remotely close to it, and that part of what I'm hoping to do in the next few minutes is to explore some of the issues associated with that, some of the stuff we've been trying to do to get closer to that, and what this might actually look like if we ever manage to do it. And I'm hoping that you can give me some smiles, jeers, comments, growls on the way that might actually help with this. And to begin with, of course, I'm sure you've already seen a picture of our beloved Prime Minister, along with Angela Merkel, and they were talking about this great thing that's going to happen, the Internet of Things, and saying how wonderful it's going to be. And there's these great comments about it's bigger than humanity, so it's obviously going to be a bit bigger than M2M, because that's only 50 billion devices. And it's also going to be something where Germany and the UK are going to lead, which I think is terrific. I mean, as some wag said recently, that means to say that Germany's going to do all of the machines and we're going to do the website. So they also talked about it being a technological revolution, like the Industrial Revolution. And I think this is a really, really good term to use, actually, because it starts taking us back to something that's going on in this space. And we can explore that a bit as we kind of move on here. And I just thought I'd give an idea about where I'm coming from, because this is our experience base. This isn't a pitch. This is telling you just what we've experienced. Effectively, Arkessa has been set up to join stuff up. And we effectively join loads and loads of things to somebody's back office system. And kind of this is a known stuff. This is known technology and ought to just work, didn't it? Really. Because essentially you're joining up something over various networks, and we often use mobile networks, but it can be anything stuck here in the middle. And of course we can have fun with all of the new lightweight protocols and so on that are coming up in this area. We can enable these sort of web dashboards and pieces of information to pick up data and communicate in two ways. And effectively we enable that remote internet. And that looks fine. We've got hundreds of thousands of devices connected up doing that. Everything from sort of low volumes of data, tiny, tiny bits of data, just simply things saying, hello, I'm still here, like a fridge or something when somebody's got to prove that their asset still exists, right the way through to a CCTV camera that's monitoring something serious that's going on, maybe at a level crossing or something. And we have a pile of applications that run from local to international and from consumer to corporate. So at the consumer end of things, you've got things like pay-as-you-go insurance, monitoring the way people drive, so that if they're driving sensibly and carefully, they may not pay so much insurance next month, which is great, actually, if you're in one of those high categories of, you know, an 18-year-old just getting your first insurance for your car, which costs an absolute fortune. If you can monitor and manage that cost by driving safely, that makes a lot of difference. So those are kind of things that are kind of linear. They're related to one another in a fairly straightforward linear fashion. A lot of people describe that as the Internet of Things because it sounds good describing it that way. But actually, as I'm sure many of you have noticed, it looks very much like the old way the utilities used to work. in the sense that you've got a SCADA-based system, you're monitoring some water level here, and as a result of that, your big thumpy engine in the middle says you can open that sluice gate over there. You're all familiar with that. It's been around for how long? Anybody got a clue? 20 years? Ah, come on. More, go for more advance on 20 years. 200 years. Anybody who got an advance on 200 years? 50 years. That sounds like going the other way.
Since Brunel put in the Great Western.
Since Brunel put in the Great Western. Anybody got any advance on Brunel?
Stone Age man.
Stone Age man. That's really good. That's really good. Yeah, I can't go as far back as that. But actually, my normal connection here is to say Henry VIII.
Yes.
And the reason for that is because just around here there was two stonking great ditches dug to drain the fens that go from around this area up to the wash, and he had a series of sort of wooden arms on signals that used to tell the guys who were sitting there by the side of a stream to open or close the sluice gate. So nothing's new. We're just doing it in different ways, and so we've got this kind of stuff, where we've got some kind of engine that extends the internet to remote things. Fine. What's really interesting about that is that the corporations that have developed this and started using it have suddenly become nervous. The people that we've got as customers right now using this thing have become a bit scared. And these are companies who are managing and controlling stuff like the street lighting in London, or some other kind of control mechanism, even vehicles and stuff like that. Why are they getting nervous? Anybody got a clue?
Hackers.
Go on?
Hackers.
Hackers. Yeah, one way or another, somebody getting hold of stuff that they don't want to happen. So what they're saying is, can we somehow or another take those engines and stuff them inside their own corporation? Now that's actually been quite a challenge, is to work out how you can do that. And essentially what people are wanting to do is they want my little kind of internet of my stuff. It's effectively what people are saying. And so instead of it actually becoming a broadened out activity, moving this M2M thing into a broader stage, it's actually become something where they want to bring it inside and say, this is mine. Nobody else is going to get access to that. Secure, it's behind my firewalls, it's my connections, it's my machines. Now that's actually quite a challenge, because essentially that tends to apply to stuff like this. And I like showing pictures like this because I like asking people kind of why do they think anybody's done it. We haven't got time to do that today. I like doing competitions around this. I'll give you one quick one. Why would you bother to put a CCTV camera for monitoring level crossings? Go on, give us a clue. Safety. That's the reason that most people come up with. No, that isn't the reason. We've got loads of these connected. Nothing to do with safety. Anybody else? Legal stuff. Yeah, so if somebody gets stuck there, you can say not our fault. Yeah, no. No, none of those things. No, mainly so that if somebody drives through the thing as the barrier's coming down and they clip the bottom of the barrier, they'll damage your level crossing. And you take a photograph of their number plate so you can bill them. Cool, that, isn't it? Completely different reasons from what you might expect. And that's one of the things that applies to almost every one of these kind of M2M type applications that people are joining up in their own particular way. So one of the challenges is when we start thinking about this stuff, we often kind of think the wrong way. And that's quite a problem as we go on. So there's these corporate intranet type of things where they want to extend their intranet out to devices. And so as a result of that, we've had to kind of build some platforms that people can stuff stuff in there or use some kind of private cloud. So effectively, they end up with a kind of enterprise service bus that is extended out to things. Doesn't sound unreasonable. Doesn't sound unreasonable at all. It's like a kind of corporate intranet that's being established. But that doesn't really look like the internet, does it? Is that resembling the internet to anybody? Kind of, sort of in some of the embryonic days when we were doing things like, the value-added data networks and the value-added communication systems that were involved in getting just-in-time products to factories. But it doesn't really look like that kind of chaos that's the true internet. And actually, if I was to ask you as a group, what do you think the internet is? I think I'd probably get quite a lot of different answers. Has anybody got something they want to say? What's the internet? Come on, somebody tell me something.
A network of networks.
A network of networks.
A reflection of the world.
A reflection of the world. Anything else?
Google and Facebook.
Google and Facebook. Anything else?
That's a good answer.
An uncontrolled environment.
An uncontrolled environment. Has it got loads of machines on it?
Yeah, well, there you go. It's been into an IoT, right?
Yeah, well, we don't kind of know. And it is really funny, actually, because if you go around and ask people what the internet is, some people will tell you totally different things. None of you have mentioned a simple mechanism for just enabling us to run our businesses. But I bet you'd have used some words like that 15 years ago. I bet you'd have been using stuff like, I can use it to send email and things. And actually, we kind of don't even think about that stuff now. So what is this thing? When we're talking about the Internet of Things, we suddenly get ourselves into a bit of a problem. So I thought I'd go back to the Industrial Revolution stuff and ask some questions about that. And here we have a salt factory up in Cheshire. Here we have... Anybody want to tell me what these are? Go on, you can do this. What's that? A blast furnace. Yeah, okay, and that's for producing steel. What else have we got down here? Does anybody recognise these things? The pottery kilns, yeah. And over here, does anyone know what they are?
Is that an iron bridge?
No, that's a lime kiln down here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you shove lime in the bottom and you put slate lime out the top of it. And then, of course, we've got, it's fairly obvious, that's some soap. Anybody got a clue as to what they've got in common?
They're all underground.
They've all got a sort of kind of impression of being underground, although, yeah, no, they haven't got the internet. Yeah, that's a good reason. Yeah, I like that. They haven't got the internet. Yeah, they're struggling because they don't do Facebook. Yep.
There'll be some basic material.
Yeah, they're always using, well, they're using sort of base materials to do something or other. Yeah. Anything else?
High energy consumption.
High energy consumption. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Interestingly enough, the industries are all apparently completely unrelated to each other, especially if you think about sort of, the China stuff and so on going on here. What is interesting is that a load of these industries developed because they all became dependent upon each other. And of course, the thing that they noticeably all became dependent upon was some kind of transport mechanism to make this work. And a great example of that is Wedgwood. Now, I'm sure you know what Wedgwood do. What did Wedgwood do? China. Okay, they produced cheap china. Fantastic. How were they significant in the Industrial Revolution? Any ideas?
I think but only because I remember you saying it before.
Okay, well, they produced drinking vessels and things like that, and plates and stuff, and crockery, that actually the big cities needed because they were having problems with sanitation and all kinds of stuff, and they could actually create clean environments for people to eat food. They were enabled people to actually live long enough in some of these stinking places that were around at the time to actually carry on running the businesses and industries that are there. The problem they had was that they created some great manufacturing processes using raw material, but every time they tried to ship the crockery that was really cheaply produced to the big cities down the roads with a horse and cart, all the crockery broke. Bit of a snag. Fortunately, a relative of Wedgwood was Telford, who was very good at digging canals and building bridges. And so actually what you find is pretty well all of those companies we spoke about beforehand all were related to one another, actually by marriage or by family relationships. And a lot of them are Quaker families. So this is where we really benefited from these kind of interrelationships of a network of people to establish this Industrial Revolution. But the thing that was really interesting about it is that none of these things were apparently related, and yet started coming together that generated this massive wealth that we gained as a nation and as a whole economy that just came from nowhere. And this is something that's beginning to be seen now in some of our industries and some of our activities, because the internet brings stuff together in a way that you can't imagine. Now, strangely enough, we've had this come back again to us from some of the customers we've got who are in utilities. They're saying we've got loads of data sources, like water companies, got tons of data sources, But actually, the people that need to use them want to apply that data in ways that we hadn't ever thought of before. Trouble is, we can't justify a special project to put all the sensors in, especially for them. But what they're saying is, chances are we've got the data, just that we can't get access to it. And we can't join it up with other bits of data that appear to be totally irrelevant to the original source to make it useful to us. And so their problem is, how do they support their community of users that may be within, say, the utility itself, or may be an associated organisation? So in the recent water problems that we had in the UK with storms and flooding and waterways going on over the place, they needed to provide information to the Highways Agency, to the transport community, to the local government agencies, to the people who were running gas and water supplies and so on. And they couldn't. They got all the data, but they couldn't make it available. It was all there, but not publishable and not secure. So what do? That's an internet-type problem, isn't it? Yeah, sort of. Anyway, I think the difficulty is what we've got this traditional problem that's been around for a long time. And one of the things I find myself doing quite regularly talking about the Internet of Things is that we are thinking in a particular way about sort of if you've only ever seen a horse, what do you specify? I want a bigger horse that eats less and runs faster. Fundamentally, that's what most people will be after. What they'll never do is specify a bicycle. Because even if you show them one, they'll say, well, that's no good, is it? It just lies on the ground. What do you do with that? And as you all know, unless you've actually ridden a bicycle, you have no clue as to how it works. Because you've got to experience it to get it. And this is one of the things that's really characteristic of so much of the technology that we've become used to, is that unless you've got something like that, until you've started using it, you haven't a clue as to how it works. You don't really know what it is and what it's useful for. And that's the same thing that's going on with this whole idea of the Internet of Things. It's about a mindset shift. Because we've gone from a kind of corporate maybe to a consumer environment. I'm not sure that we have, because actually we've got these utilities really saying we want this. Are we going from a sort of an international to an intimate environment where it's actually very personal to me and somehow I'm connected into an international arena? Or maybe it also works the other way. The intimate to me is also becoming internationally available. So my sensors in my home might become very significant to somebody else for some general purpose that I never even thought of. So we've got a kind of challenge between some of these things. But we also start going from what looks like a structure that's quite organised, like I'm monitoring the water level here and I'm opening the sluice gate over there, to something that's quite disorganised in the sense that I'm going to provide the information that's about this water level here, and I'm going to throw it out there and see if anybody wants to join it with something else and use it for some purpose I've never imagined. So one of the crazy things, for example, on this recently was we were working with a company who monitors traffic going down a road. And they wanted to know what the average journey time was between destinations. And then we started saying, well, why don't you start publishing that information and see what happens? And the strange thing is that they started coming up with stuff that was really weird. Like, actually, if you can monitor how fast the traffic's moving through a particular part of a town, or whether the traffic has got a longer dwell time somewhere, maybe you can change the advertising at that bus stop. It's electronically controlled. If the traffic is moving fast, you just want to say, buy sausages, for example. Or alternatively, if it's going very slowly, you can give them quite a complicated advertisement that actually says, our sausages are wonderful because they contain only free-range meat, and it's lovely and you'll love them. And look, here's a picture of how you can make it into an interesting meal. And here's a recipe for it. Because they're going to be there long enough to sit there and read the information that's available on the screen. Sorry, the sausage thing was completely made up. There wasn't anything to do with anything there at all. And then you end up with having to, do we explain what this is about, or do we provide it to be explored? And in other words, do we go from a control environment to what appears to be chaos? Because once you enter into that space, you create a creative environment that can do stuff that actually we haven't a clue about. Because the source of data doesn't have to be a machine. It could just as easily be the barcode on your jumper. Interesting to see where this goes. Now, several people have said to me, the way this will be made to work, the way we're going to make this work, is we're going to do something that we've got very good at. We're going to produce standards. We're going to work out exactly what we're going to do. We're going to define it all and say, that's how you get to it. The snag about it is, of course, is that that doesn't really lend itself terribly well to that more chaotic environment. You need a standard that's a standard enough to enable you to get stuff out there, but not to constrain how you think and what you do. And even when you look at things that you think will be really need to standardise, you can standardise pieces of it, but you allow diversity within it. You know, when they came up with standard, sizes of screws and bolts and nuts and things like that, that was brilliant. But actually, there's lots of different standards to match lots of different applications. The same thing applied to things like getting the rail chairs right, but not necessarily to the track width. Because although there's some good standardisation on the track width, the track gauging, there was lots of different gauges for different purposes. But you needed mechanisms for them to transfer and exchange. But the place this becomes most interesting is when you extend the idea of my internet of my stuff to my kitchen, or my environment, or my home. Because once you get into that place, you find yourself coming into that challenging space, which is how do I find my things, and how do I know that they're really doing what I want them to do, and are they really private? Well, that ends up with this kind of interesting kind of question that I thought was quite a nice little thing here. Because you might find stuff connected together with parameters that you've given it that you maybe didn't expect or anticipate beforehand. Because the consequences can take you into different places that you'd never imagined before. And interestingly, the EU, in its great wisdom with all these things, has been looking at this issue and saying, oh, that looks a bit scary. And they've come up with a pile of stuff. Now, I think this is really great because they try to rationalise and control all these things. And actually, I have to admit that I went to a conference where it was a gnaw your own arm off experience to actually maintain attention. But anyway, they came up with a number of things, and these three things are kind of key characteristics that they saw as being, for our European operations, important. And they're actually in M2M challenges, and they can be met quite easily. But then there were this other group here, another 7 things, that were the Internet of Things challenges. And those challenges are much, much harder to manage when you start going out into the wild. And you end up with this problem over how do you know that the stuff really exists, that it's actually a real device, that you can trace its use, you can give access to it, that you can control it, that its data can't go everywhere, and that nobody can get at it when they want to.
But that's the exact opposite of the internet and the World Wide Web and what made all that fantastic innovation.
Absolutely right. Yeah. So you end up with this kind of really brilliant dichotomy of all of these things coming together. So you've got to do some of these things to protect individual rights and security at the same time as enabling diversity. Isn't that fun? So have we got this Internet of Things sewn up? I'm not really sure that we have. And this becomes particularly the case if you start combining data together to produce new pieces of data, because the new piece of data is just as valid as the original. And of course, we've all came across that recently when we had a great supply chain issue, as you remember, about producing lasagna. You know, we knew everything about the supply chain, we knew everything about how this meat was going to be processed, we knew the whole system that led up to delivering it into your supermarket perfectly. And it's not surprising the supermarkets thought they'd done everything right. But the problem was is they didn't know what the original source was. So once it had started and you got this thing appearing, everything else worked perfectly. But if you don't know that it's a real thing, and it's the thing you expect it to be right at the beginning, everything else goes wrong. So we have an interesting challenge. And just to come back to what we've been trying to do in this area, to sort of finish up really, is to say that we've been exploring how to do this and how to link that to create some kind of engine that enables this environment to occur truly in the Internet of Things, so that we can share and exchange data. And what we've tried to do is come up with a virtual space where we can join that with established partners who have built true Internet engines that validate and verify and enable the true device to be verified so you can trust it, that we can then come up with something that we believe works. And we're trying out some pilots with that right now. And if there's anybody here who'd like to come and have a conversation with us about saying, hey, we've got some data and we'd like to try to make it available, or we'd like to try to share this, come and have a conversation, because there's so much to explore here. But together, I think we can do things that can create something in this world that will make it a better place rather than a challenging space for some other individuals. And one final thing to let you think about is, you know about the idea of Nike guys running down the streets in Germany, and as they run down the streets, if the street lights are off, they come back on again. Cool. This raises all sorts of exciting questions, like who decides whether that's a good thing or not? Is it a good idea? Well, yeah, it is if you're a shoe salesman or you've got some kind of facility being set up there, and you can ask the question, is this a great use of taxes or not? But if you're the taxpayer, you might want to turn around and say it's a really bad idea. You're going to use a lot more energy. You're going to be consuming our carbon budget. You're going to produce light pollution, and it's uncontrollable, and it's a bad use of my taxes. So I guess the question is how do we decide? How do we take part in this? And how do we enter into this Internet of Things? But I think together, Cambridge Wireless is a brilliant forum for us joining some of these thoughts and ideas together to see if we can actually truly build this. Because if we do, we'll create something entirely new, and won't that be exciting? Over to you. Thank you.
We've got time for a couple of questions.